My son came home after 10 years, but he didn't age a single day. I should have fallen to my knees in joy, but something inside me froze, because he had the same face, the same skin, the same look, as if time had stopped exactly where it took it. That night, I touched his face as one touches a ghost, and when my fingers found her cold skin, so cold it felt like death, I learned that the boy who disappeared was not the same one who returned. Since then, the clock no longer tells the time. He marks the time that remains before their return, and God forgive me, but sometimes I wish he had never knocked on that door. My son is back, but he didn't come back alone. I'll never forget the sound of that knock on the door. It was almost 2 in the morning, and the house was already immersed in that heavy silence that only exists in the early hours of the morning. I had just turned off the television in the living room, but I left the bedside lamp on, as I always do, because old people are afraid of the dark but pretend they aren't. When I heard the first knock, Tosi thought it was just my imagination, the sound of wood creaking, wind, I don't know. But the knocking came again. Louder. More urgent. The kind of knocking that starts causing problems even before you open the door. My heart raced instantly. You know that feeling when your chest tightens so much it feels like someone reached inside and squeezed your heart tightly? That's how it was. At that hour, nobody brings good news. It's either the police, the hospital, or a desperate neighbor. I stood up slowly, feeling my knees protest, as they always do when I sit for too long. I leaned on the living room table, took a deep breath, and walked down the dark hallway, the cold floor sticking to my bare feet. With each step, the pounding repeated itself. Again and again. As if that person knew exactly how afraid I was to open the door. As I approached the door, an old memory flashed through my mind like lightning. Another early morning, 10 years earlier, the phone ringing, a neighbor's trembling voice, the news that my son hadn't come home. The same knot in my stomach, the same strange silence outside, as if the world had held its breath. I stopped a couple of steps from the door, feeling my hand sweat, even with the night chill seeping through the cracks. I wanted to go back, pretend no one was there, but when you're a mother, you know. Something big was about to happen. I looked through the peephole, almost without courage, afraid to see a policeman again, someone in uniform, someone with pity in their eyes. But what I saw made me take a whole step back, as if someone had pushed me. It was a familiar face. Too familiar. The kind of face you see even when you close your eyes to sleep. My son. My boy. Standing at my door. With the same hair, the same beard style, the same dark coat from the night he disappeared. For a moment, I thought my heart had stopped beating. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, pressed against the door, my forehead against the wood, trying to figure out if I was really awake or if I had finally gone completely insane.
10 years, my God.
10 years looking at that yellowed photo on the wall. 10 years praying, arguing with God, asking for signs. And suddenly there he was.
The same.
Intact. Frozen in time. I felt the tears burning my eyes without even realizing I was crying. I gripped the doorknob tightly, my hands trembling so much it felt like I wouldn't be able to turn it. When I finally mustered the courage to unlock the door, my legs almost wouldn't obey. I opened it just a crack, like someone afraid of what might come in with the morning wind. But there was no wind at all. The air outside seemed still, dense, too heavy, as if the whole street was holding its breath along with me. I pulled the door open slowly, and when I saw his face completely, there was no doubt. It was my son. The same brown eyes, the same way of tilting his head when he looked at me. But there was something more there, something I couldn't name. At that moment, time did something strange. It seemed as if the living room clock stopped working, that the ticking vanished, that the whole house was suspended in a second that would never end. I smelled his clothes, the same cheap perfume he wore when he went out that night, mixed with something metallic, cold, that I didn't recognize. He didn't have a single wrinkle left, not a single gray hair, nothing to betray the 10 years that had passed. Meanwhile, I knew I was completely different, older, more tired, bearing the marks of every sleepless night. I fell to my knees without even realizing it. It was as if my body gave up pretending to be strong for a second. My hands went straight to my face, as if I needed to check if this was real, if I was really there. Hot tears streamed down my face, wetting the cold hallway floor. I wanted to say his name, scream, ask where he'd been, what happened, why he never called, why he disappeared like that. But my voice simply wouldn't come out. It was as if my throat was closed, locked by all the years of forced silence. He took a step forward, and, reflexively, I almost recoiled. Not because I was afraid of him, but because something was wrong with that scene, although I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He looked down at me, with a mixture of tenderness and strangeness, as if he didn't understand why I was in that state. That's when he spoke. The same voice, the same tone, without haste, without apparent emotion.
Mom,
I'm home. That's all. As if he had left just a few hours ago and was returning from some kind of outing. When I heard those words, part of me simply wanted to throw myself at his neck and pretend nothing had happened, that the 10 years of hell had never existed. Another part, however, quieter, older, whispered deep inside, something is wrong. Very wrong. The way he looked at me, the exaggerated calm at that hour, the way the air around him seemed colder than the rest of the house. I knew that night wasn't a simple blessing. It was the beginning of something I wasn't prepared to face. Still kneeling, I gripped the doorframe with one hand and extended the other toward him. My fingers trembled so much I could barely keep them steady. He didn't move immediately. He watched me for a few seconds that felt like an eternity, as if he were analyzing, weighing, measuring my every reaction. Then, finally, he took another step and entered. When his foot crossed the threshold of the door, a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just my son coming home that night. Something else was coming in with him. Something I didn't yet understand, but which, deep down, already frightened me. In the following hours, I barely took my eyes off him. I sat in front of the sofa, hugging a blanket I didn't even remember grabbing, watching his every movement, every blink, as if he could disappear again at any moment. The room was lit only by the yellow lamp, which cast long shadows on the walls, and he sat there, motionless, with the same serene expression he had when he was young. He seemed oblivious to time standing still around us. Me, with white hair and wrinkled hands. Him, intact, untouched. A living photograph of the past. I tried to talk to him. I asked if he was hungry, cold, tired. I questioned where he had been, with whom, how he got back. But he just looked at me as if trying to recognize an old memory. He didn't seem confused, he seemed distant. Like someone waking from a dream that's too long and still doesn't know what reality is. And when I mentioned the 10 years that had passed, he frowned, as if that number were impossible, unpronounceable, too absurd. 10 years, he repeated, in a whisper that seemed more for him than for me. I trembled, because, in that instant, I understood that he believed he had left home yesterday. The same yesterday that no longer existed. For me, time was cruel. It consumed youth, stole nights of sleep, destroyed birthdays, Christmas dinners, empty chairs at the table. For him, time didn't even touch. It left no marks, not even shadows. When I took his hand, cold, surprisingly cold, I felt a shock in my chest. How can a body remain like this after so much time? How can the world have aged without scratching even a single hair on his head? I spent the night comparing our faces without saying a word. He watched me, calm, almost curious, as if I were the odd one out in the room. And perhaps I was. I was the one who aged. I was the one who changed. I was the one who carried the weight of those years. He simply returned, as if time had stopped back then, and only now pressed play. When dawn broke, the light streamed through the curtains and illuminated his face, and for a moment, I felt the same joy I felt when he was a boy running around the yard, but this joy came with a bitter taste, because something there was out of place, like an old photograph found in a trunk, too beautiful to be real, too untouched to comfort. He got up slowly, walked through the house with silent steps, running his fingers over the furniture, as if trying to recognize his own home. He touched the walls, smelled the curtains, looked at the photos on the shelves with a furrowed brow. It took him a while to realize that in some of them he was no longer there. And when he saw the empty space where he should have been, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Fear? Surprise? Or just emptiness? In the kitchen, I made coffee, the same coffee he always asked for when he came home late from work. I hoped the smell would awaken some reflex, some memory. But he just stood there, watching the steam rise, without reaching out, without asking for sugar, without saying anything. As if that familiar aroma meant nothing anymore. It was then that I realized something even more disturbing. He didn't seem to smell anything. Nor did he have any desire. Nor hunger. As if his senses were preserved, but switched off. Like light bulbs installed, but without power. Sometimes, as he walked through the house, his footsteps made no sound at all. Not even the creaking of the floorboards, nor the light dragging of his socks on the floor. Absolute silence. And when I called his name, he took seconds that long to respond, as if my voice needed to travel through some distant place to reach him. I can't explain it. I only know that my heart ached every time he took so long to react. He was my son, but not completely. He was him, and yet he wasn't. A mixture that made me want to hug him, and at the same time, recoil. I began to notice small details that no one would notice at first glance. His gaze took a little longer than usual to blink. His skin, when touched, felt as cold as porcelain. His body didn't tremble in the morning chill, nor did it react to the heat of the stove. If he was silent, the whole room was too, as if the world knew that something extraordinary had crossed my threshold. And me? I alternated between the desire to protect him and a silent fear of not knowing what I was experiencing there. I spent the whole day with him, trying to keep him close as if he would slip through my fingers at any moment. I talked about the past, about the dog he loved, about the bicycles he destroyed trying to do wheelies, about the chocolate cake he burned when he was 16. He listened. He looked. But he didn't complete my memory with his own. It was like talking to someone who remembers without remembering, feels without feeling, exists without being fully present. At the end of the afternoon, when the sun began to set, he stopped at the window and stared outside for long minutes, without blinking, without moving a muscle. And in that silence that swallowed everything, a question hammered inside me like a heavy bell. Could it really be my son who has returned, or just something that looks like him? When I woke up the next day, after hours that felt like minutes, the light streamed through the window as if the sun insisted on revealing secrets I was barely ready to face. I got up slowly, feeling my spine complain about the sofa where I'd slept, because no, I couldn't leave him alone on that sofa. The fear that he would disappear again, evaporate, slip through some invisible crack between time and nothingness that kept me tied to him like a shadow. And when I opened my eyes and saw him sitting at the table, motionless, staring at the wall as if the house were a new set, I felt the same shock as the first moment. My son, exactly like the boy who disappeared. As I brewed coffee, my thoughts kept returning to that lost day in the past, the day everything fell apart. The last time I saw him before that strange night. He left wearing his dark coat, the same one he was wearing now, saying he was going to meet friends. He gave me a hurried kiss on the cheek, chuckled at some inside joke, and promised to be back before midnight. I remember asking him not to be late, that the street was dangerous, that mothers always sense things their children ignore. He smiled like someone who doesn't believe in tragedies until they knock on the door. And he never came back. In the following days, the entire city became involved in the search. The police passed by my house so many times that even the sound of the patrol car's engine became part of my memory. We made posters, hundreds of them. I pasted them with my own hands on rain-soaked lampposts, on the cold windows of bakeries that smelled of fresh bread at dawn. I handed out flyers at traffic lights, my voice choked with emotion every time someone asked, "How long has he been missing?" I always responded with hope, as if each word had the power to bring him back. 10 years is a long time to hold on to hope. But I continued. Because mothers don't bury their children alive. And now, looking at it as if I had opened the door to yesterday entering my kitchen, something inside me twisted. The image from the posters remained stuck in my mind, paper yellowed by the sun, a printed photo with that young, promising, vibrant smile. And then something hit me like a punch. My son, do you know you were missing for 10 years? He turned his face slowly, as if the question had crossed an empty space between us. And when he answered with a weak, almost curious smile, my body froze. Mom, I only left yesterday. That's when I realized some of the signs were still up there. I clearly remembered a specific post, near the corner market, where a sign had never been torn down. I myself didn't have the courage. It was like a tomb without a body, a reminder of what was missing. So I decided to put what I was seeing and feeling to the test. I put on a coat, held his hand, cold, without a warm pulse, without a pulsating life, and we went out into the street together. We walked slowly, like entering a dream that had been repeated too often. The neighborhood seemed the same, but it wasn't. The trees were bigger, the houses renovated, the faces new. Time had passed. Only he hadn't. As I turned the corner, there it was. The poster, faded, torn at the edges, but unmistakable. The same photo of the smiling boy, proudly holding his high school diploma. I approached, my heart pounding in my throat, and he stood behind me, watching. My hand landed on the paper, which crumbled almost to dust beneath my fingers, like an old memory that can no longer bear the weight of the present. Is that me? He asked, his voice too low that I turned slowly to look at him, and at that moment I felt something tighten in my chest. The face on the poster, the 22-year-old boy, his face was there, the same. Exactly the same. Some people stopped to look. Two ladies whispered. A young man made a face of astonishment. It was impossible not to notice. My son was standing in front of his own missing person photo, 10 years later, with the same face, the same body, as if time had been bent, hidden, ripped away. I felt my stomach churn. It wasn't just his return that was strange. It was the way the world reacted. As if everything around was trying to understand the same thing I was, because old posters don't mix well with living ghosts, and in that moment, for a second I wished I hadn't lived through. I felt afraid of him. We walked home in absolute silence. He walked expressionlessly, while my mind screamed questions I didn't dare ask aloud. Each step echoed as if we were stepping into a memory. When I closed the door behind us, I realized that the story, the one I had waited 10 years to end, was only just beginning. And when he sat back down on the sofa, the silence was so profound I could almost hear time breathing. Because there, right in front of my living room, was living proof that the past was not over. He had returned, but perhaps not alone, and I still had no idea of the price. That night, while the house slept but my thoughts did not, I sat before him as one observes a broken miracle. The dim light of the lamp made his skin pale, almost translucent, and the silence between us was so thick it could be felt in the air, like dust settling slowly. I held a cup of hot tea, trying to ward off the strange chill that seemed to have entered with me since he returned. He looked at me, not like a son reunited with his mother, but like someone trying to understand who I was within that house that he believed was still yesterday. So I took a deep breath and asked, for the 1000th time, my voice choked with emotion, trying to hold back tears that were already tired of falling. Where have you been all this time, my son? He blinked slowly, as if the process were new or burdensome. He frowned with a curious effort, like someone searching for a drawer in their memory that simply no longer exists. And with a calmness that tore me apart inside, he replied simply, I haven't been away. That hit me like a reality check. He wasn't joking. He wasn't lying. There was no fear in his eyes. There was no hesitation. He believed deeply. He remembered that he had left home the day before. He didn't remember the police, the searches, my despair, or the world that had dragged on without him for an entire decade. When I mentioned missed birthdays, he smiled confusedly, like a child listening to the story of itself before it was born. For him, time did not exist. It didn't happen. It didn't occur. I clutched the apron between my fingers to keep it from crumbling. Memories came rushing in. Me searching for him among the park trees, calling his name until my voice failed me. Me sleeping with the hallway light on, waiting to hear the key turn in the lock. Me sitting at the table with an extra plate, even knowing no one would occupy that place. Me growing old, him not. Life passing by, him standing still. And now sitting there, saying with absolute serenity, "That doesn't remember anything." He held my hand, and I swear I almost fainted, not because of the touch, but because of the absence of it. His hand wasn't warm. It didn't pulse. It didn't carry that human warmth I'd always recognized. It was like holding cold porcelain. Beautiful, perfect ceramic, but not alive. He looked at my wrinkled fingers with sad, almost childlike surprise. He asked why I was different, why my voice sounded lower, why my hair was white. And when I answered truthfully, because 10 years have passed, he tilted his head as if trying to understand the concept of time for the first time. I explained everything, every year, each search, every prayer. Every night I went to sleep fearing the worst. Every photograph I held when courage failed me, and he just listened, silent, attentive, but disconnected. As if I were telling a story that happened to another family, not ours. He didn't cry. He wasn't moved. He just asked in that voice that was too soft, "And why do you think I didn't come back sooner?" I couldn't answer that question. Not then and not now. Because the truth is, looking at him, I didn't know if my son, it cannot return, or if Shold not he had returned. There was something deep in his eyes, a dull, almost artificial glint, that made me believe he wasn't just forgetful. He was disconnected from everything that made him human. As if his memory had been ripped out at the root. As if something else had taken the place where childhood, joy, fear, and family once existed. And then, for the first time since his return, he said something I will never forget. "Mom, why do I remember you, but not myself?" I trembled all over. Because that sentence seemed wrong. It seemed backwards that a person can forget the world, but forget themselves and still recognize another person clearly. That's not human. It's not natural. It's not time, it's interference. Something somewhere meddled with it, stole its past and returned only a selective fragment. A link, perhaps. A point of return.
Me.
And there, sitting in the living room with my son who hasn't aged, who doesn't remember his own life, I realized that his absence was only the prologue. The disappearance didn't end when he returned. He only changed form. And inside me, a silent fear began to grow. Because if he doesn't remember where he went, maybe I need to find out. And perhaps the truth is not something a mother can survive knowing. The first signs began so subtly that, at first, I blamed my own emotions. Perhaps it was exhaustion, trauma, paranoia accumulated from a decade of absence. But I soon realized it wasn't my imagination, it was real. And so real that it throbbed like a bell inside my chest. My son was home, alive, breathing, but some invisible gear inside him was spinning out of rhythm with the world. He seemed to exist as a materialized memory, but not as a being of flesh, time, and history. On the first night, I heard footsteps in the hallway, rhythmic, continuous footsteps, marking the wooden floor with an unsettling constancy. I got out of bed, my heart racing, and went there. And he was there, standing in front of my room, looking at the door as if expecting something to happen. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just watched. I asked if everything was all right, but he didn't answer. He just turned his face slowly towards me, with that look that seemed to see right through me. Note and Methan, he started walking again, slowly, quietly, like someone sleepwalking while awake. The next day I noticed something else. He wasn't hungry, nor thirsty, nor sleepy. I would place the plate before him, fresh rice, steaming beans, tender meat just the way he liked it, and he would just watch the steam rise, as if witnessing a distant phenomenon. Sometimes he would lift the food with his fork, bring it close to his lips, but he wouldn't eat. When I insisted, he would smile slightly, as if trying to reassure me.
"I don't need it right now, Mom."
But the day passed, night fell, and he remained the same. He didn't even seem to feel thirst. As if his body didn't require what keeps any living being standing. There were times, and it took me weeks to admit this, when I felt cold when he was near. Not an ordinary cold. It was as if the temperature around him dropped, as if the air became heavier, denser, still, as if the entire environment reacted to his presence. The neighbor's cats, who always came to my gate, now ran away when he appeared. The birds stopped singing when he crossed the yard. Even the kitchen radio, which had never given me any trouble in 20 years, started emitting static when he passed by. A coincidence? I wanted to believe so. But too many coincidences accumulate until they become a warning. At night, I would find him sitting in the dark, on the sofa, at the table, in the hallway, without any light on, for no apparent reason, just being. I would ask if he wanted company, and he would say he was fine, that he liked the silence. But there was something in that silence, something that seemed to breathe. Sometimes I would see his silhouette still for hours, without moving an inch, as if he weren't pausing but processing, as if his brain were connected to something I couldn't see, something too big, too old, too cold. One day, as he gazed out the window, I noticed his eyes didn't reflect the sunlight the way ours do. The natural sparkle simply wasn't there. They were deep, clear, beautiful eyes, but opaque, like glass without glass. I spent hours trying to find an explanation, but the truth prevailed. My son was home, but not fully. Something within him remained nowhere. A missing part, torn from time, returned incomplete. An imperfect return. And each day, this emptiness within him seemed to grow. Sometimes he would talk to himself. Short, disconnected words. Whispers I didn't recognize, like fragments of a forgotten language. When I asked what it was, he said he didn't know, that it just appeared in his mind, like dreams that seep into wakefulness. And then there was the night I found him staring fixedly at the wall, so fixed, so still, that it seemed part of the house. I called him 3 times before he answered. When he finally turned his face, his eyes were brimming with tears. Mom, I think I'm forgetting how to be human. That sentence pierced me like a blade, because I already feared it, but hearing it from him destroyed any denial. He wasn't just distant. He was fading away, like an old photograph that loses color at the edges. I tried to touch his face, but he recoiled, not out of fear, out of bewilderment, as if human touch were too new to comprehend. Seconds later, he tried to smile, and the smile came out crooked, broken, like a learned gesture, not felt. Gradually, I realized that something was pulling him toward a place I couldn't reach. A space beyond memory, beyond time, beyond everyday life. And the more I tried to keep him present, offering him food, talking to him, touching him, the more he seemed to hear a call that didn't come from Earth. And that call was getting louder, more insistent. Because someone who returns after 10 years without aging doesn't return unchanged. IT returns with the silence of the places where it has been, and that silence began to speak. It happened on a calm morning, one of those mornings when the sun streams through the window like melted butter, spreading warmth and memories. I was tidying the living room bookshelf, trying to occupy my mind so I wouldn't think about the fact that my son was sleeping less and less, or not sleeping at all. He was in the backyard, sitting in the old shade of the avocado tree, staring into nothingness with a serenity that frightened me more than comforted me. Then, while dusting the picture frames, I found something that shouldn't exist. An old photograph. It was a picture of our family gathered at his 22nd birthday party, the last one before his disappearance. I remember that night vividly. The table full of food, the red balloons tied to the ceiling with gold ribbon, the smell of chocolate and strawberry cake. Me holding his shoulder, him laughing, his father on the other side with a proud look. A happy portrait, untouched. But looking at the photo now, something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I trembled holding the picture frame because in the image before me there was no one beside me. No laughter. No sun. No arm around my shoulder. The space was empty, as if someone had been erased from the world. The background remained the same, the table, the candles, the guests in the background, but where my son should have been there was only a gray blur, like a stain of wet ink, like a dissolved memory. Time somehow rewrote that photo. But I was there. I remembered. I won that day. I lowered the photo, my heart pounding like a war drum. I went out into the yard, my feet almost tripping. He was still there, motionless as a statue, staring at the horizon as if waiting for something only he could see. I knelt before him and held out the photo. "Do you remember that day?" My voice came out weaker than I intended. He picked up the picture frame slowly, with an almost inhuman delicacy, like someone handling something foreign. He stared intently, first at me, then at the image. His eyes darkened for a second that I would swear was longer than it should have been. Then he whispered something that chilled me to the bone. I should be here. That it wasn't a surprise that he said that. The surprise was Ash said. It wasn't an observation. It was a lament. It was a discovery. It was as if he were seeing his own absence for the first time. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The air around us grew heavy, still. Even the avocado tree leaves seemed motionless, as if the world awaited our reaction. He touched the blur of the photo with his finger, and, for a moment, I swear I saw the image tremble, as if trying to recover what it had lost. His eyes filled with a pain I had never seen before. Not human pain. Pain existential. As if he were aware that a part of him had been ripped from reality. When I tried to take the photo from his hands, he gripped them with unexpected force, firm, almost urgent. His gaze was lost and, at the same time, hungry for answers. "Mom, if I don't remember where I've been, and now I see that I wasn't even here, then where did I exist during all that time?" The question hung between us like a shard of glass. Because I didn't know the answer. Nobody would know. Photography is material memory. When it changes, it's because something bigger is interfering. Something that doesn't just involve his body. It involves the fabric of history, reality, the record of the world. It was as if the universe was trying to correct an improper presence. As if my son were a mistake that time couldn't completely erase. After that day, I hid the photo. I kept it at the bottom of a locked drawer, along with old letters and mementos that I myself avoid revisiting. I didn't tell my neighbors, my friends, or anyone, because this story couldn't be explained. It didn't fit into the ordinary world. And part of me knew that if that image changed, others could change too. And if the world was erasing my son from physical memories, how long until it erased him again? I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the door, watching him on the sofa, motionless, like a mere reflection of the past. He seemed quiet, too quiet, like someone waiting, like someone listening. And I wondered, without the courage to say it aloud, how many realities exist between the pain of losing a child and the terror of being reunited with them? What if this photograph was just the first sign that the world was adjusting, either to correct it or to undo it again? I knew I couldn't pretend anymore that it was just pent-up emotion. A son who doesn't age, doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, doesn't remember an entire decade that surpasses any faith, any logic, any blind hope of a mother. So I decided to do what any mother would do when love clashes with fear. I took my son to the hospital. I didn't tell him everything, never. I just said he needed tests, that it was preventative, that after so many years away I wanted to make sure he was okay. He agreed without resistance, with that strange, almost artificial docility. Like someone who accepts orders but doesn't understand the reason. On the way, inside the car, I observed his face reflected in the window. His smooth skin, his distant gaze, his chest rising and falling in such a perfect rhythm that it seemed rehearsed. There was no trembling, no cold, no sign of exhaustion. He looked at the houses passing by the window as if everything were new, and perhaps it was. Every tree, every lamppost, every person on the sidewalk, everything seemed to awaken in him a silent, but not human, curiosity. It was as if he were recognizing the world for the first time, or for the second, without remembering the first. When we arrived at the hospital, I sat next to him waiting for Tria, my heart pounding in my whole body, in my throat, my fingers, my ears. The room was cold as always, with that disinfectant smell that brings back bad memories. I remember the nights I spent there after his disappearance, asking for news, begging for any clue. Seeing him sitting next to me now was like a materialized ghost. And at the same time, I didn't know if the ghost was him or me. When they called him, I walked beside him to the doctor's office. The doctor smiled, asked a few basic questions, and asked him to sit on the examination table. My son obeyed, with almost childlike docility. I observed every detail, his skin temperature, the fact that he didn't tremble at the cold metal, the complete absence of reaction to the icy stethoscope. The doctor frowned briefly, but tried to maintain professionalism. Then the tests began. Blood pressure, reflexes, heart rate. And everything seemed too perfect. When the doctor returned with the initial results, I noticed the astonishment behind the mask of control. He looked at me first, then at my son, as if he were facing something that textbooks don't teach you to diagnose. He said that the cellular levels were too stable, more than normal. That there was no wear and tear, no oxidative stress, nothing consistent with a 32-year-old body. He looked 22. Inside and out. As if time had frozen his organism in the prime of youth. I asked if this was common, my voice faltering like glass about to shatter. The doctor answered calmly, but his eyes betrayed his tranquility.
No.
Never. He ordered more tests. CT scan. MRI. He wanted to study the case. He wanted to admit her. He wanted to document it. And at that moment I felt the warning inside me, not in words, but in instinct. A silent scream that said, "Don't leave it. Don't hand it over. Don't expose it." My son looked at me suddenly. A look that seemed different from the previous ones. A conscious look, as if he too had heard something that wasn't said. As if he knew he would be taken, analyzed, opened up, studied. As if he sensed white cages and endless needles. He touched my hand with sudden force, so cold it sent shivers down my spine. And he said only, "Mom, don't leave me here." That sentence shattered any rationality I was trying to maintain. I stood up, thanked the doctor with a trembling voice, and made up some excuse. We had another appointment. We'd come back later. I left with my son by the hand, firm, almost running down the corridor. With each step I felt eyes on my back, as if someone or something noticed that this return shouldn't have been allowed. As if the world was watching the mistake. Inside the car, while breathing too fast for my heart to keep up, he stared out the window.
Silent.
And I understood in that moment that protecting my son wasn't just about love, it was about survival. If the government, science, or any authority knew what he was now, they wouldn't see him as a son. They would see him as an object, as an anomaly, as an experiment. And as I drove back home, my hands sweating on the steering wheel, a question hammered away like a premonition. If his body is perfect, what happened to his soul, and what is this too perfect person trying to hide? The following nights became territory I feared to tread. The house, once a refuge, turned into a silent stage where something breathed unseen. My son would spend hours still, staring into space, and I tried to convince him to sleep, even knowing he didn't need to. But that morning, when I finally saw his eyes close on the sofa, I felt such intense relief that I even cried. I hadn't seen him sleep since he came back. Perhaps that night I thought his body was succumbing to human exhaustion. Naive hope. Around 3 a.m, always 3, I woke to a sound I'll never forget. A scream. A scream that wasn't his, and yet it was. A sound that didn't belong to the body I cradled with longing, but to something older, deeper, more broken. I ran to the living room and found him arching his body as if being pulled by invisible threads. His fingers twisted, his jaw clenched, his chest rising as if he were gasping for air, and he wasn't. He couldn't be. He didn't breathe like us.
He didn't need to.
I approached him with fear and love entangled in a single heart, and when I touched his shoulder, he opened his eyes, completely black. Without scara, without light, without humanity. 2 black holes that sucked away any faith I still had left. He shouted words I didn't recognize, in a language that doesn't exist on Earth. They sounded like metal dragging on concrete, like bones breaking, like wind inside tombs. I wanted to believe it was a dream. But no mother dreams of the impossible while the impossible breathes before her. He grasped the air with his hands as if trying to reach something invisible, and for a second, I swear, I felt another presence in the room. A weight that bent the space. A coldness that didn't come from the window, but from within him. A coldness that was absence, absence of light, absence of soul. I called his name repeatedly, until my voice failed like torn paper. Gradually, the nightmare subsided, and his eyes returned to their normal brown, though more opaque. And then, sitting there, trembling without trembling, he whispered in the voice of a lost boy, "They call me when I'm sleeping." My whole body went cold. I asked who they were, but he lowered his gaze like a child afraid of his own thoughts. The early morning was so silent I could hear the clock ticking each second with an echo of threat. He said that in dreams, if dreams were what they were, there was a place without doors, without sky, without ground, and figures without faces, without skin, without eyes. Only presence. He said that when he tried to remember, the memory ached like a knife, and that each night the call grew stronger, more insistent, closer. After that early morning, the nightmares returned. Not every night, only on those that were too quiet, on those when the wind stopped, on those when the moon seemed as large as an eye watching the world without blinking. He would shout words I didn't remember at dawn. Sometimes I would wake up standing, without realizing I had gotten up during the trance. I would find marks on the floor, furniture moved, unlocked doors. Once, I found the door open at 4 in the morning, and him standing in the yard, looking at the sky as if he were waiting for someone to come down, or to pick him up. The house, once full of life, even in its pain, became too silent. Objects fell without anyone touching them. Doors slammed even without wind. Lights flickered near him, and only near him. Once the TV turned on by itself when he passed by, black screen, no image, just that hissing sound that sounds more like electronic breathing. I tried to hide my fear behind love, but love trembled too. Because loving something you don't understand is like embracing fire without knowing if it warms you or consumes you. One day, after another episode, he sat on the edge of the bed, calm, as if after a storm. I touched his head, ran my hand through his hair as I did when he was a boy, and asked if he wanted to talk about what he saw. He took a deep breath, or pretended to breathe, and said in a broken voice, "Mom, when I sleep, I don't dream. I remember." That phrase kept echoing inside me until I lost sleep myself. Because remembering something that isn't yours is like being a home for something that no longer belongs here. Something that might want to come back. And for the first time since he returned, I thought that perhaps my son wasn't the only thing that crossed that threshold that morning. Perhaps he brought something or someone with him. It was on a cloudy afternoon, one of those when the sky seems to hold its breath before collapsing, that someone knocked on my door. It wasn't like the first time. It wasn't the weight of something impossible returning to the world. It was a dry, restrained knock, almost calculated. The kind of knock that doesn't beg for entry. It demands it. My heart raced immediately, as if recognizing the danger before my eyes could see it. My son was in the living room, motionless, hands on his knees, his gaze lost on a point only he could see. And when the sound echoed a second time, I noticed he blinked. Just once. As an involuntary reflex. As a response. I crossed the corridor with short steps, breathing deeply to keep control of my trembling hands. I opened only a crack, as if danger couldn't pass through such a small space. But what I saw on the other side made my legs defy the floor. A woman. Too pale a face, sunken eyes, skin tense as if she had forgotten to sleep for many years. She wasn't old, but she wasn't young either. There was a misplaced sense of time in her, as if she carried decades on her shoulders without ever having lived them. And when she said my name, without me ever having seen that face, my soul froze. "I need to talk to you. It's about your son." The phrase fell between us like iron on glass. I wanted to close the door, pure, animal, maternal instinct. But she reached out, and her fingers were covered in darkened marks, as if something had burned her skin from the inside. It wasn't a tattoo. It wasn't a wound. It was a symbol, something organic, sinuous, alive. "I know what happened to him," she insisted. How could she? No newspaper published it. No neighbor commented. I locked myself in with him like a she-wolf protecting her cub. even without knowing if it was still my son who was holding back my instincts. I called my son in the firmest voice I could muster. He appeared behind me without making a sound, like a human shadow. When the woman's eyes met his, there was something in the air, a silent shock, a halt in time. She didn't recoil. He didn't look away. They stared at each other as if recognizing something I couldn't see. Then she said, in a low voice, as if confessing, He didn't return alone. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. She explained quickly, as if she knew she could be interrupted or watched. She said that people like him had existed before, in other times, other regions. People who disappeared and returned without aging, without memories, without hunger. People who carried something in the shadows of their eyes, something ancient and hungry. And that they all changed with time. That some stopped sleeping, others stopped talking, and some gradually ceased to be human, like a candle that melts until only the burnt wick remains. My son didn't move.
He didn't speak.
He just watched the woman as if listening to something without sound. I asked, my voice faltering, what she meant by, he didn't come back alone. She took a deep breath and glanced down the hallway, as if afraid of being followed by the very air. The body returned, she said, but perhaps the soul no longer belongs solely to him. The world went silent. I could hear my heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. I wanted to push her away, deny it, scream that she was wrong, but part of me, the part that had already felt the coldness of touching my son, knew that she was speaking truths that hurt because they were true. I asked her where she had seen cases like this. She looked away, or hid her answers. I've been following the trail. He's not the first, and he won't be the last. And before I could ask anything, she took a step back, like a shadow retreating. Protect him while you can. I turned my face away for just a second to look at my son, a reflex, an instinct. And when I returned to the door, she was no longer there. No footsteps, no sound of the gate opening, nothing. She vanished, as if she had never existed. My son remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the spot where she had been. Do you know this woman? I asked. It took him several long seconds. I don't remember her, but she remembers where I've been. That night, I sat alone in the dark room while he stood by the window, gazing at the sky with unblinking eyes. Outside, the wind had ceased. The whole world seemed to have held its breath. That woman's voice echoed deep within my skull, like a doomed prophecy. He didn't return alone. If he didn't return alone, then who or what returned with him? That was no longer just a story of reappearance. It was the beginning of a silent invasion. It was a few weeks after that woman's visit that I noticed the first visible change in my son's body. I was folding clothes on the sofa when he walked through the living room without saying a word, as always, and something on his wrist caught my attention. A dark, thin, almost imperceptible mark was etched onto his skin. At first, I thought it was dirt, a watch mark, a shadow of light. But when I asked him to show it and touched it with trembling fingers, I realized it wasn't just on the surface. It was part of him, a living part, a symbol, small, yet pulsating, like breathing ink. He looked at his wrist strangely, as if he'd never seen it before and probably hadn't. The mark wasn't there when he returned. It wasn't there in the first few weeks. It was new, growing, like a root silently breaking through the earth. I asked if it hurt, if it burned, if it reminded him of anything. He just shook his head, but his gaze remained fixed on the mark longer than it should have. There was something mesmerizing about it, something neither he nor I understood, but which seemed to be watching us back. In the following days, the symbol grew. From a thin line it became a sinuous design, like a snake, like a branch, like a circuit. I can't explain it. Every time I looked at it, it seemed to have changed a little, darker, deeper, like a tattoo made by invisible hands. And when the light touched that line, I swore I saw the design move, even if only by millimeters. As if you were completing yourself. As if you were waking up. It wasn't just a mark. It was a process. I spent nights secretly researching the internet, old forums, texts about mysterious disappearances. I learned more about folklore than my head could handle. People disappeared and returned exactly as they were the day they vanished. Some carried symbols. Others spoke unknown languages. None of them aged, and none remained human for long. Ancient stories, buried, forgotten because fear is also a form of silence. When I found the first account describing exactly what I saw on my son's wrist, vibrant, progressive marks, like organic runes, my hands got so cold that I dropped my phone on the floor. I showed him the article, trying to keep my voice steady. I wanted answers. I wanted a call. But when he looked at the screen, his eyes darkened for a second, the same second I'd seen during my nightmares. He said something that dragged my soul across the floor. I feel like it's calling me that it wasn't fear. It was recognition. It was as if that mark wasn't an invasion, it was a return. As if something within him was remembering where he belonged. At night, while he slept, if that was sleep, I observed the symbol under the lamplight. It pulsed.
I swear.
Like its own heart. A slow, deep beat, synchronized with nothing in this world. I approached and touched it carefully, like a mother trying to hold onto a child about to get lost. The skin was too warm under my fingers, but the rest of the arm remained cold. An impossible duality. Light and shadow in the same body. Life and absence sharing space. One early morning, I woke to a sound, a low hum coming from his room. I climbed the stairs slowly, afraid of what I would find. And when I opened the door, he was sitting on the bed, eyes open, and the symbol glowed bright red, illuminating the room with a pulsating light. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe.
He didn't speak.
He just remained there, like an antenna transmitting something far away or receiving it. When I called his name, the glow faded like a burned-out light bulb, and he fell onto the mattress, motionless, like a toy without wires. I ran to him, my heart pounding in my chest. I touched his face, his chest, his hands. He opened his eyes slowly, confused, like a child waking up without remembering who he is. I asked if he was in pain, if he knew what had just happened. He only murmured something that made the world collapse inside me. They are teaching. From that moment on, I knew for sure my son wasn't just changing. He was being molded, prepared, like a piece fitting into a mechanism bigger than both of us. The mark was only the beginning. His body was becoming an archive, a receptacle, a key. And I needed to find out what that key unlocked before it was too late. After the symbol came the cars. First one, discreet, parked across the street, tinted windows, engine off. Then two. Then three. They weren't neighbors. They weren't curious onlookers. They were men who didn't look at any house, only at mine. They stood there for hours, without speaking to each other, without averting their gaze, like sentinels waiting for the exact moment to invade. I tried to ignore them, close the curtains, pretend my life wasn't being watched, but the truth was blatantly obvious. Someone knew that my son was no longer just mine. One morning, while making coffee, the ritual that kept me human, I heard the clear sound of drones. Not one, but several. The metallic buzzing passed over the roof like a swarm. I slowly opened the window and saw small lights crossing the sky, circling the house like sniffing dogs. One of them hovered over the yard for too long, observing, recording, studying. My son was sitting in the shade of the avocado tree, his eyes fixed on nothing, and the drone remained motionless above him. As if it recognized him. As if it responded. As if it were waiting for a command that wasn't mine. By then, I no longer received visitors. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't trust the neighbors, who whispered behind the curtains like someone observing a suspicious miracle. My son didn't talk about the symbol, but I saw it, each day more defined, wider, climbing up my arm like a plant that grows and takes root. And the cars kept adding up. 3 became 5. Then 7. And one day, someone knocked on the door. Not an ordinary knock. A rhythmic sequence, rehearsed. Authority hidden in the wood. When I opened the door, there were 2 men in dark suits with neutral expressions. They showed me badges I didn't recognize, government symbols that didn't belong to any agency I knew. Not federal, not military, not civilian. One of them smiled with exaggerated politeness. The other didn't blink. They wanted to assess my son's well-being. They explained that they had received reports. Reports. As if he were a meteorological phenomenon, that I replied firmly that he was fine, that he didn't need an evaluation, that it was a family matter. They insisted I refused, and when I closed the door, I realized that the refusal hadn't driven them away. It had only made them more interested. That night, I heard footsteps in the backyard. People walking among the shadows, dim flashlights, short whispers. I went out the back door, afraid to discover what I already knew, but needed to see. And there they were, uniformed men, with instruments I didn't understand, scouring the grounds, measuring the air, collecting samples as if my house were contaminated soil. My son was inside, looking out the window with an expression too calm, as if it were inevitable, or known. When I went back inside, I locked doors, closed windows, and turned off lights. I tried to breathe in the dark, but the air felt thicker, as if the world were shrinking around us. My son approached, silent, and for the first time in weeks spoke firmly. "They want to study me, Mom." I asked if that scared him. He replied with something that shattered my world. "No. What scares me is what they would do after they understood." The following morning, I found a document left at the gate and signed, without official notice. Just a brown envelope with the phrase, "We can protect him, but we need him." Inside, a card with a phone number and a code. Nothing more. No explanation. No direct offer. Just a veiled promise. And an implicit threat. Because too much protection means capture. They weren't going to wait for my permission to take him. They weren't going to give up. They weren't going to stop. I went out to get milk on the street and felt stares. People watching but pretending not to see. A woman crossed the sidewalk as I approached. A man held his cell phone as if filming without recording. There were rumors. There was surveillance. My son was no longer a secret. He was a phenomenon. And phenomena don't belong to mothers. They belong to those who believe they have the right to exploit them. I returned home with trembling hands and found my son sitting at the table, a symbol gleaming beneath his skin like living coals. He slowly raised his face, as if he had heard my thoughts before I spoke them. "They don't want to save me, Mom." Silenced, he looked deep inside me. Too deep. "They want the place I came from." That sentence was everything. .it wasn't about him. .it was about what brought him back, regarding what might come next. And at that moment, I began to understand. The government didn't want my son. I wanted the door that he was. It was on a silent night, so silent that even the clock seemed to have given up marking time, that my son finally spoke. Not like in broken conversations, not like short answers or hazy memories of someone trying to piece together the past. He spoke like someone breaking an ancient seal, like someone opening the door to a room closed for centuries. I was sitting on the floor of his room, watching the symbol grow like a burning root up his arm, when he said my name in a voice that wasn't just his. It was like two voices in layers, human and non-human. I looked at him with my heart pounding between my ribs, and something in the air became dense, electric, like before a thunderclap. He took a deep breath, or something mimicked breathing, and his eyes were lost on the ceiling, as if looking through everything. "Mom." I remembered. That sentence broke me. I waited 10 years for answers. And when they finally came, it was no longer consolation, it was ruin. He closed his eyes and began to describe, in fragmented words, where he had been all this time. It wasn't Earth. It wasn't heaven. It wasn't a dream. It was a place without light, without ground, without horizons. A space where time didn't exist as a measure, only as absence. He said he felt no hunger, thirst, cold, or heat. Only suspension. He spoke of lights. Not light that illuminates, but light that perceives. Like eyes that don't blink. Like consciousness that observes. "They saw me, Mom," she said in a broken voice. I asked who they were. But there were no names. No definition. Only presence. He said they were faces without eyes, silhouettes that didn't move with legs, but with intention. They didn't touch. They didn't speak. But they were there. Watching. Was I dead, he asked, with the pain of a child inside a body that feels no pain. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no. But I couldn't. He continued. He said that sometimes he felt as if he were floating above himself, as if his body were not a body, but a memory. His consciousness wandered, dissolved, and there was no yesterday, no tomorrow. Nothing aged there. Nothing changed. It was motionless eternity, impossible to comprehend. He described metallic sounds, deep vibrations like breathing machines. He said there were others. Not people. Not bodies. Just adjacent presences, like echoes that never fully formed. And that someone or something returned. They sent me back, he said, but I don't know why. The symbol on his wrist pulsed slowly, warm, alive. As if confirming every word. I asked if he wanted to come back. He hesitated. For a long time. And then, with eyes both teary and empty at the same time. They didn't break up with me. My whole body rejected it. I felt the urgency to protect him, but also the terror of knowing that perhaps I was protecting a bridge between worlds. He said that, before returning, he heard one last thing. Not with his ears, but with his mind. An instruction. A purpose without form, without explanation.
Go.
Observe. Open. Those 3 words weren't spoken in Portuguese, he explained. Nor in any human language. But that's what they meant to go. Observe. Open. And at that moment I understood. He didn't return willingly.
He was sent back.
As a messenger. As proof. As an open experiment. They put something in me, Mom. He said. Something that grows when I try to remember. The symbol on my arm burned bright red in response. Like a life of its own. Like an operating system activating. I trembled without trying to hide it. He looked at me with a fear that wasn't his. It was my own reflection. I think they want to get through. And I'm the door. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. Because in that instant, I realized that the story was never about bringing him back. It was about bringing something through it. My son wasn't just a survivor. He was a vessel. And the world, the government, the drones, the symbols already knew. They didn't want him because he came back. They wanted him because what you sent may come back to you as well. And the symbol was just the first clue, the first crack, the first opening. After he remembered, or something remembered through him, everything accelerated. The change that had previously been slow, subtle, almost undeniable, became impossible to ignore. Human traits began to dissolve like a photograph exposed to sunlight. Not all at once, not abruptly, but in small details that broke my heart each time I noticed a new one. It was like witnessing death in life. Only this time, it wasn't my son leaving. It was something taking his place. His gaze was the first thing to change. Previously distant, it was now too deep, as if he could see things behind walls, inside people, through time. When I spoke to him, I sometimes noticed that his eyes weren't focused on me, but on something behind me, something I couldn't see. I asked what it was. He took a while to answer. Line, she said, connections. Paths that intersect. As if the world were made of invisible threads, and I could touch them. I shuddered. Because he spoke with the naturalness of someone learning to use a new sense, a non-human one. His skin grew too cold. Not feverish. Not wintry. Cold from absence. I hugged him, and it was like touching a stone. There was no warmth to respond to my touch. There was no return, only absorption. He didn't shiver when it was cold. He didn't sweat when it was hot. It was as if his body had switched off its human sensors, or as if it were preparing to function under another law, another physics, another ecosystem. One night I found him standing in the kitchen staring at the refrigerator, but not at the food. He was looking at the motor, as if the low sound of the coils were a language. He reached out, and the instant his finger touched the metal, the refrigerator snapped shut, and all the lights in the house flickered. I called his name, but he remained there, motionless, like an antenna receiving a silent transmission. When he took his hand away, everything went back to normal. He turned to me slowly, and for the first time, let out a smile, but not his own. It was a strange smile, too stretched, as if his face were mimicking an expression he didn't fully recognize. And then came the words, disjointed phrases in languages no human being would recognize. Whispers that sounded like static, like an echo from a deep well. He spoke in his sleep, and sometimes while awake. One night, while I was washing dishes, I heard his voice behind me saying something that made the glass slip from my hand. I turned quickly, and there he was, eyes as black as pitch, reciting a sequence of sounds that seemed like a ritual. When I finished saying stop, he fell silent, as if the command had been recognized. But recognized by Wo? Another sign. Electronics would stop working when he approached.
The phone would shut down.
The router would burn out. The television would die on a black screen whenever he entered the room. It was as if something inside him emitted a field, a frequency, something incompatible with our technology. Or perhaps too advanced for IT. IT was around this time that I noticed another devastating change. He began to forget me. Not everything. Not always. But moments. Small memories. His favorite breakfast. The name of his childhood dog. My birthday. The song I used to sing to him to help him fall asleep. It's as if something is pushing those memories outward, he said one day, in a frail voice. I'm getting fed up. Fold my heart broke at that vocabulary. Full of what? From who? And then came the outbursts, short, but intense. He would stop mid-sentence and remain motionless, like a stone, lost in a frequency that couldn't reach the world. Sometimes, his eyes would darken completely for seconds, seconds that were far too long. And I would call him and call him and call him until he would come back. But when he did come back, it wasn't always him who answered. One night, when I touched his face to bring him back, he said, in a voice that wasn't his own, "We're almost through." I recoiled as if I'd been punched in the eye. That wasn't my son talking. It was someone else, something, using his throat as a gateway between worlds. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call for help. But how can you call for help for something that no one believes exists? Who would save my son? Who would save what was left of him? The following days were a terrifying experience, watching my soul fade away halfway. He looked at me with sadness or anger or nothing at all. Emotions shifted like clothes. And the symbol on his arm shone like an open eye, like a portal, like a circuit. He wasn't just changing, he was becoming half human, half echo of another place, a body divided between two existences, a bridge about to be crossed. And within the silence of that house, that silence that was no longer just silence, I realized that the struggle was no longer about keeping him alive, that IT was to prevent what wanted to be born through him. It took me months to accept what now seems obvious to me. My son didn't come back. Not as he should have. His body returned. His face returned. Even his voice, sometimes, returned. But what filled that body was no longer just the life I had given birth to. It was something else, growing like a root in dead wood, feeding on memories, invading spaces, occupying the place where humanity once was. I took too long to see it because love blinds, and a mother prefers to believe in the impossible rather than accept the irretrievable. The first major shock came when another case appeared in the news. A man in another state, missing for 9 years, reappeared identical to the day he vanished. Same face, same age, same empty stare. And the article stated, in a sensationalist tone that disgusted me, apparently healthy, with no signs of aging. I almost dropped the plate on the floor. It was him, it was my son, repeated in another house. A duplicated experience. A pattern. The reports increased. There weren't many, but enough to dispel any doubt. Young people disappeared and returned unchanged. Without wrinkles. Without hunger. Without sleep. Some with marks on their bodies. Others with violent memory lapses. And all of them, absolutely all of them, began to change over time. They became cold, distant, obscure, until one day they simply disappeared. Not forever, to somewhere, if the return had a deadline. As if they were being returned to a temporary world. And that's when I understood the unknown woman's phrase. He didn't return alone. IT wasn't a metaphor. It was literal. My son was the vehicle, the driver, the entrance, and others like him existed, scattered, observing, waiting for the same signal. We weren't a special family. We weren't chosen by miracle. We were victims of a selection process I don't understand. And perhaps no one will understand it without going insane. The news began to disappear from the newspapers just like the individuals. They vanished from reports, from archives, from public records. Links broke. Pages were deleted. Names ceased to exist. I tried to find the first young man's article. It wasn't there anymore. As if it had never been published. As if the world were correcting leaks, erasing traces, controlling narratives, and something inside me whispered that the government wasn't just observing, it was collaborating. Because the return of the disappeared was not an isolated phenomenon. It was a test. It was a sample. It was preparation. My son started talking less. Eating even less than he already wasn't eating. Blinking less. Sometimes he would sit in the living room for hours, and I swore I heard a buzzing sound coming from his body, a low frequency that shouldn't come from human flesh. The symbol on his arm now reached his shoulder, climbing up his neck like roots trying to take over the whole tree.
He didn't complain.
He didn't seem to suffer. It was as if his humanity was voluntarily giving way, or being expelled. One afternoon, I sat across from him with the old photo album, desperate to make him remember. I showed him pictures from his childhood. His first birthday, the day he learned to ride a bicycle, the dog named Thor that he loved so much. He looked at everything with cold interest, like someone watching a documentary about strangers. No smile, no tears, no memories, until I turned to a specific page, the last photo before he disappeared. He shuddered. The symbol on his arm pulsed, and he simply said, "I remember the light. The light, the same one who saw him, the same one that brought him, the same one that was now being expected." And in that instant, for the first time since he returned, I felt something inside him look at me. Not with love. Not with longing. With assessment. Like someone analyzing structure. Like someone calculating time. Like someone waiting for the exact moment to cross. My son was not a miracle. He was a messenger. And messages don't stay. They come and go, and they pave the way for what will come next. I wondered, trembling alone in that dark room, how many more have returned? How many more will return? And when the return journey is over, what will come next? Because now I knew for sure he didn't go back home. He returned to warn that something bigger is coming after him. The day arrived as all inevitable tragedies do, without announcement, without warning, without mercy. I woke to a silence that wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an absence of reality. The house seemed empty, although I knew he was there. The air was heavy, dense, almost solid, as if something had shifted in the invisible fabric of the world. And when I went downstairs, I found my son sitting at the table, his eyes fixed on the photograph that had disappeared weeks ago, but now it was there, restored, rewritten, with him present. The image was perfect. No blur. No flaws. My son smiled in the photo as he did before his disappearance, as if nothing had happened. As if those 10 years had been erased not only from the physical body, but from history. He caressed the portrait with marble fingers, and when he looked up at me, I realized that something inside him was almost complete. Almost formed. Almost ready. "Mother," he said in a voice so human it hurt, "I'm leaving." I felt the ground disappear beneath me. My legs weakened like straw in a fire. I asked where to, why, when, but he didn't know. Or he couldn't say. He only said that he felt the call, like a deep bell echoing inside his bone. An invisible compass pulling his body toward a destiny that was no longer human. And then he looked at his own arm, at the symbol that now shone like a newly opened wound. "They want to take me back. But not only them." That sentence pierced me like a knife. I asked who else wanted to take it. He breathed slowly, or pretended to, and said, "The people out there. The government. The science.
They want to use me.
To open me up.
To study me."
Mom, I wouldn't survive that. And suddenly, my love became a weapon. I, who waited 10 years, cried 10 years, prayed 10 years, now had to choose. Hand my son over to the government and watch him become an experiment, or hide him and face whatever came next. There, at that table, I realized that love isn't just about welcoming. Sometimes it's about sacrificing. Sometimes it's about protecting with violence. Sometimes it's about losing to save. I sat before him, silent tears streaming down my face. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He hesitated before replying. "I don't want to go, but I don't think I'm strong enough to stay." And when he said that, I understood what he was asking, not so that I would hand it over, not so that I would keep it, but so that I could decide. It was a choice no mother should have to face, to save what remains of the son, or to save the world from what may be born from him. I thought about running away with him, crossing cities, disappearing like stowaways do. But running from what? Drones? Satellites? Forces that don't belong to Earth? I thought about handing him over, and immediately felt nauseous. Because if the government got their hands on him, there would be no going back. They would open his body, like a forbidden book. They would search for answers until they emptied him completely, and I thought, fearing what my mind was capable of conceiving, of the third option, to prevent it from being used by any side. But how can a mother kill the son she waited 10 years to hug again? How do you put an end to something that originated from you? How can you destroy the only miracle the world has given you back? He held my hand, cold as a tombstone, and said in a voice without trembling, "If you hand me over, they win. If you hide me, they will come. If you kill me, nothing else will get through." The sentence hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked at my son and saw in him both child and abyss, flesh and portal, longing and threat, and then I understood there was no right choice. There were only consequences. When I stood up, the world seemed smaller, as if every wall of the house had drawn closer. He looked at me with brown eyes again, as if for a moment humanity had returned only to break me even deeper, and I knew that my next move would decide both of our fates. The entire future fit into that instant. There was no yes I could say, nor a no I would have to carry forever. The house breathed a sigh of relief, the light flickered, and everything became too quiet. Because the moment of choice had arrived, and choices like that don't save, they tear apart. The next morning, the world seemed different. Not just inside the house, outside too. The sky had a strange color, as if someone had drained the blue and left only silence. The birds weren't singing. The neighbor's dog, which barked every morning, was silent. Even the trees seemed motionless, like paint that hadn't dried properly. Time wasn't moving, it was waiting, as if the universe had held its breath, waiting for the conclusion of something that had begun with my son's disappearance 10 years ago. He was in the room, standing, as if he knew the end was near. His brown eyes, now deeper than a moonless night, followed me to the last step of the stairs. There was no fear in them, no hope, only awareness, as if he had understood his role within a plan greater than life. "Mother," he said, "they're coming back today." The phrase hung in the air like a sentence. The symbol on his body was no longer a drawing, it was a map. Illuminated lines spread from his wrists to his neck, like activated circuits awaiting the final command. Each line shone like blood transformed into light. He was no longer just my son. He was an antenna. He was a beacon. He was a signal. I went out into the backyard, my hands trembling so much I had to hold them in my apron. The wind that had been cutting through me was now still, as if it weren't allowed to exist. I looked at the sky and saw something impossible. The clouds weren't moving. They remained suspended, trapped in the same place, like a frozen photograph. The air tasted of metal. The earth seemed to pulse. Then I heard the first sound, a low, deep buzzing sound, coming from nowhere and from everywhere. I ran inside and found my son kneeling, his hands on the floor, as if trying to hold onto the last vestiges of his human body. His eyes darkened and then returned, like a lamp about to burn out. Each time blackness enveloped his eyes, I felt something in my chest, as if another presence were trying to see through him. "They're calling," he whispered. "I can hear them clearly now." The television turned on by itself. The screen went white, then black, then white again like a signal trying to stabilize. And then it began to transmit something that didn't seem like an image.
Or sound.
It was noise, but organized noise.
Code.
Language that the body understood, even if the mind denied it. My son began to repeat the frequencies with his voice, identical, precise, as if he were a transmitter, as if he were an antenna. I held him by the shoulders, desperate, begging him to fight, to resist, to stay. He looked at me, and in that look I saw the boy who ran around the yard at 6 years old. I saw the teenager who hugged his diploma at 18. I saw my son for a second. "Mother," he said, "I don't know how much of me is still left." And then the clock stopped. Everyone, the one in the kitchen, the one on the phone, the digital microwave, even the pointer on my wrist stood still, as if time had been switched off. The silence expanded like a wave. A lightning bolt cut through the rainless sky. The ground vibrated, and my son stood up, all by himself, as if another force were lifting his body. The symbol's light exploded in red, illuminating the room like a bleeding heart. The house's electricity went out with a snap, and on the television screen, an image appeared, blurred, distorted, but undeniable. Faceless silhouettes, dense as liquid shadow. Many of them, IT was a vision, IT was a broadcast, IT was an advertisement. My son turned to me, his eyes completely black, empty like the place where he had been. And in two voices, his own and the other that grew inside, he said, "They're here." At that moment, I understood that I was no longer a witness, that I was a survivor. The world didn't lose my son for 10 years. He lost the world that knew him, and now I was about to lose much more. I held his hand, cold, metallic, even knowing that it might no longer be his. Because love is stubborn, blind, suicidal, and while the air trembled around us, while reality folded like wet paper, I closed my eyes and held on tight. The return was not the end, IT was start. And the rest of the world didn't even know yet. Today I understand something that no mother should have to learn this way. Not every return is a blessing. Sometimes what the world gives back to us comes with cracks that weren't there before. Sometimes restored hope demands a price that the human mind was not made to pay. I look at the sofa where my son used to sleep as a child, and all I can think about is, who, or what, is watching us when the impossible walks through the door? Are we ready to receive what time has forgotten? Can we bear the weight of the answers we've been asking for years? Or are we asking for too much without understanding what it would bring in return? I close my eyes and ask myself, if I were you, would you let your child go? Would you give up what you love to protect the world? Or would you hold on until the end, even if that end meant the beginning of something much bigger? Because the silent, cruel truth is that nothing ended that night. That was just the first warning point, one among many, and maybe, just maybe, the next house they knock on will be yours. If this story made you think, shudder, reflect, or feel fear, don't leave in silence. Comment on what you would do in my place. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications because that was just the first door that opened. And together, we will continue. Because when the impossible returns, no one comes out unscathed.